Hey guys, welcome to the third part of my video series on building a chat application using Flask and Socket.io. So in the last video, we set up a database, a NoSQL database for ourselves in which we created a users collection where we can store the user data, right? So now in this video, what we're going to do is we are going to implement the login functionality in our chat application. So without any delay, let's get started. Okay, so I'm gonna be using Flask login Python library for implementing the login functionality in my chat application. So Flask login provides user session management for Flask. So what do we mean by user session management is that it will keep a context of whether the user which is viewing the current web page of my application is authenticated or not. So Flask login will basically keep or manage the session of any logged in user for you. So in this way, Flask login will help us to manage everything related to login. Okay, so let us see what all we have to do in order to get started with Flask login. So the first thing is that we will have to install the Flask login library. So we can just do pip install Flask login. So that is what I'm going to do. Right. So once that is done, we are going to move to the next thing. Let's see what it is. So I have to configure my application, my Flask application. So I will have to create a login manager object, and then I will have to initialize my login manager by passing my Flask app object. So that is what is the next thing that I need to do. So basically I need to connect my Flask application with the Flask login manager. So here let me open app.py, and here I'm making the app, right? So before that, let me make the login manager. So login manager is equal to login manager. So let me just import it, and then what we will do here is that, okay, well, let me make it down here after I'm making the app. Let me keep it here. So login manager dot init app, in which I will pass the app object. So yeah, so in this way I have connected the login manager with my Flask application object. So that's done. Let's move to the next thing. So I will need to define a user class. So basically it is doing user session management. So for that I need to have a user class which needs to provide these methods: is authenticated, is active, is anonymous, and get ID. So all these things is what I will need to implement in a custom class that I'm going to create now. So let's do that. So here I'm going to create a file called user.py, and now I'm going to create a user object. So class user. So the first thing is authenticated. So before that, let me just create the constructor. So what will the constructor of my user object get? It should get username, email, and password, because this is all data that I have about any user. So if I initialize a user object, it should have all these information about that user. So I just specify that self.username equal to username, and so I'm basically now defining the properties of my class object. Self.password equals password. That's it. So in this way I have defined the constructor, and now let's go to the main thing, which is defining the methods. So is authenticated. So now the thing is that, do I need to define any logic for is authenticated? Well, I will need to define this logic for is authenticated if my user class is used by authenticated as well as unauthenticated users. But for now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be creating the user object only for those users which are actually authenticated. So for now, I'm just gonna return true always. Similarly, for isActive function, I'm just gonna return true for now. Okay, I think I'm doing something wrong here. um, okay, well, I think we are putting indentation a bit wrong. Yeah, so indentation was a bit messed up. Okay, so everything seems fine now. And then we have is anonymous. So is anonymous should be false because I'm not going to create any anonymous user with this object. Okay, and again we will return false this time because the user is not anonymous. And finally, get id. So get id is a function which returns the unique identifier for any user in our application. So I'm just going to return the username parameter. Okay, so that's it. And right now PyCharm is giving me some suggestions. It is saying that is authenticated can be static. Why can it be static? It can be static because it is not using any class parameters. So let me just make them static. There's no problem in making them static for now. Okay, so these are all static methods. So in this way, I have created a custom user class which can be consumed by the login manager of Flask login library. So yeah, so this is done. Now another thing is that I have to define this load user. So I have to provide a user loader callback. So what happens with this user loader callback is that whenever Flask needs to know if the current user is authenticated or not, or it wants to get the information of the user whose information is stored in the cookies or in the session in the browser, then Flask login will use this function to get the user data. So I'm just gonna put it in my app.py somewhere here, or let me just put it at the end. Okay, so at the rate login manager, I am doing load user. So in the load user, let the user provide us with username. So if we get username from the Flask login, and I need to tell Flask login if this user actually exists in our database or not, and if what is the information that we know about this user, right? So all that we need to provide in this load user function. So I will have to provide that information, right? So how do I give that information to Flask login? Well, for that, I will have to fetch that information from my database, right? So currently in my db.py, I have defined only save user function. Now I need to define get user as well. So get user will take the username and will provide you the data about that user. So how to do that is, let's say we get the user data by doing users collection dot find one, in which I will pass a filter. So a filter is what which will be matched against each document to see if those keys match or not, and only then we get the data. So I'm just defining that the ID should be username, and I want to get all the information about that document. So once I get that, I will convert this user data into a user object of this class. Okay, so how to do that? User is equal to, well, I can simply do return user. So let me just import user. So now the parameters are username, email, password. So I will just do user data username, which is actually underscore ID. Then it is user data email, and finally password, which I can do it like user data password. That's it. So this is what I will be returning. But now let's think a bit. The users collection will actually return none if the match is not found. So let's say the username doesn't exist in our database, then in that case none will be returned. So I have to consider that case as well, right? So if user data is not none, well, so this is what we are going to be doing. If user data, well, we can do it like this: if user data, else none. So what we are saying that is, if user data is something other than none, then this thing should be returned, otherwise simply return none. Okay, so this is our get user function, and now I am gonna use it in my app.py user load user. So it is going to be like return get user So I'm going to import it from db.py get user username. That's it. So this is a very simple function which I am using to load the user. So yeah, so in this way we will be able to load the user. And now let's move to the last thing, which is the most important, or you can say the main thing of this complete implementation, which is a route where I define the login rule. So let me just copy everything from here and see what it is all about. So in app.py, after home, let me just define my route for login. Okay, so let's see. It is slash login. Methods are get and post. So why do we have get and post method? It is actually because when there is a get request, I'll be returning the HTML data, the HTML page where there will be a login form. And when it is a post request, then it simply means that the form has been submitted and I get the data. So I'm going to change a few things here. Okay, so all this can be removed, I think. Let me just remove it all. Okay, so let's see. So in the normal case, what I would like to do is that I would like to render a template called login.html, right, which will have the login form. So if request dot method is, let's say, post, so what do I want to do in that case is what I will define here, right? Otherwise everything will be happening like this, that I'll be returning the login.html template. Okay, so let us take a look at our login.html template, which I've already created. It's quite simple. It has a simple form where I have defined that the form submission method should be post. It should be a post request. Action should be slash login, which means that the request should go to slash login. Then the label username, where I have defined the type as text, name is username, which I will be using to fetch the data in the Python code. Then similarly for password, the type is actually password, and the button. It's quite simple. So let's see. If the user actually submits, I want to get what username did they put, right? So request dot form dot get. So in the Flask library, we have a request object which contains all the data related to the request which has been made to the current view. So request.form.get username and password input is equal to request.form.get password, right? So this is what I have right now. So now the thing is that that we need to consider here is the password input is going to be a plain text password, whereas we no longer have that plain text password because we have actually hashed it, right? So we have a hashed password and we need to compare it with the plain text password. Then how do we do that? So in order to do that, I'm going to create a method in my user class, which is def check password, in which I will get the password input. So what I will do is I will use the workzug libraries check password. So we are using workzug for generating the hash password, the password hash. So it also has a check password hash function. So that is what I'm going to be using. So return check password hash. So it uses, so check password hash takes first argument as the password hash and another one as the plain text password. So password hash is the self dot password. So we are getting it password, right? So from the DB we are generating this user object. So this password is the hashed password, and then we have the password input, which is the plain text password, right? So yeah, so in this way we can check the password. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is to first of all create a user with this much information. So user is equal to get user username. So first of all get the user. Now if user exists and user dot check password password input, so if these two conditions are getting satisfied, only then I will like to say that the user is actually authenticated, and I would like to tell Flask login that login this user. So login user is a function inside Flask login library, where you pass the user object and then that user will get logged in. So that is what we wanted. And finally we return redirect to the URL for home. That's all. So that is all we need here right now. But let's say either the user did not exist for that username or the password was incorrect. What would we like to do? We would like the user to still remain on the login page, right? But I would also like to tell them that they failed to log in, right? So how to achieve that? So for that, I'm just doing something like a message which is an empty string initially, and if this is the case, then the message is failed to login. And finally, I am passing the message as a template parameter. So message equals to message, and what I'm doing here in my template is that I've already put the message template variable like this, right? So the message will get flashed. So yeah, so this is fine. I think this all should work. So let's try it out. Okay, so before trying it out, let me see if my server is running or not. Okay, so it is running. It is in the debug mode, so it is reloading itself. So let me just open 127.5000 slash login. Okay, first of all, let me open 5000, right? So this is the page, and now let me open slash login. So look at that, I get username and password fields here, right? So let me put the password as Nikhil because I have already created a user in my database whose username was Nikhil, and the password, let me put a wrong password first. So let me just put anything and let's submit. So look at that, it is saying failed to login because the credentials were incorrect. Now let me put Nikhil again and the password as test, which was the actual password. Submit. And okay, so we are getting that this session is unavailable because no secret key was set. So actually Flask login requires a secret key of your application, and that I have not defined, right? So let me just do app dot secret key is equal to, now you can define any secret key here. For now, let me just put it like my secret key. You can check on what should be the best value for this secret key. You can Google that down, like how should I define my secret key. But for now, let us keep it my secret key. Okay, so now let me just reload this page again, and done. We are on my chat app page, right? It is asking me to enter the username and all, right? So it means that login happened successfully. Now let us see how do we make the user log out. So logout is very simple. I have to do this. Let me just copy it and put it here. After login, there is logout. So now here's the thing, that there is something called login required decorator. So if the user, if you want the user to access this view only if they are logged in, then you can put this login required decorator. If the user is not logged in, then they will be put to slash login page, right? So it is also defined in Flask login. So let me just import it. And logout user is a function defined in Flask login. Let me import it as well. And once the user has logged out, let me redirect them to the home. The URL for home, we do not know the actual URL, so URL for home. So this is my logout logic here. So login and logout have been defined. So let me just check if I can do something here. Slash logout. The server could not verify that you are authorized to access the URL requested. Okay, so let us start this complete thing by starting with login. Let me put Nikhil and the password as test. Submit. We are logged in, it seems, and then log out. Yeah, so it seems like I logged out. Now one thing that you can notice is that I'm not able to understand if I'm logged in or logged out, right? So how to solve this problem? So what we will do is that so how do you know that who is the current user that we have in the context, right? So one thing is that you can use the current user property of the Flask login. So current user is actually defined in Flask login. So if current user dot is authenticated, so if the current user is authenticated, then I will actually redirect the user to home. I do not want them to actually log in again, right? So this is a kind of a behavior that I want. So let us see if this works or not. If current user is authenticated, then instead of making them log in, redirect them to home. So let's see if that works or not. Slash login. Okay, bool object is not callable. So actually it is not a function, it's a property. So let me just load it again. Okay, so I am at login page actually right now. So let me just put Nikhil and test as my username and password, submit it, and now let me just do slash login again. Look at that, I'm not going to the login page anymore, I'm still at my home page, right? So why is it happening? It's happening because my current user is actually authenticated. Now let me just log out. So I have logged out. So actually we are having some problem here. Unauthorized, the server could not verify that you are authorized to access the URL requested. You either supplied the wrong credentials or the browser doesn't understand how to supply the credentials required. So this might be happening because actually I have to tell Flask login that what is my actual login view. So the thing is that whenever you put this login required decorator, Flask login needs to know what is the login view's name. So in our case, the name of the login view is login only. So I'm just gonna do it something like this: login manager dot login view is equal to login. Okay, so let us see if this works or not. Okay, so my app is loading and look at that. Now we go straight to login, right? So when we went to log out, it took us to login. So now let me do something like this. Let me log in first. Okay, I have logged in, and now I will just do slash logout, and look at that, I'm back here. And now if I try to do login, I am able to log in. So it seems to be working fine. So now since we are getting a bit confused, like when we are at the home page, is the user authenticated or not? Let's say we want to know that, right? So what can we do here is that in the index.html, what I will do is I'm just gonna print something. So it is gonna be hi and then current user dot username. So this is what I'm doing now. So let us see. So it is currently empty. It is coming empty because for an unauthenticated user, the username is nothing, right? So what I can do is I can put an if condition here. So if current user, so basically Flask login puts current user in your template context by default. So is authenticated. So if current user is authenticated, only then I want to print the username. Otherwise I want to do something else. So in other case, I want to just print here let's say guest. Okay, so let's keep it like this. And finally I have to do end if. Okay, so in this way I've written this string kind of thing, and look at that, we're getting hi guest. Okay, and now let us log in, and now let me put the credentials, and here you go, you're getting hi the username, right? So it seems to be working fine. And now if I do log out, let's see what happens. Look at that, it becomes hi guest. So yeah, so in this way we have implemented the login as well as the logout functionality for our chat application, and it seems to be working fine. And also now let's say I want to make my chat login only for logged in users, right? So let me just put it like login required. So it's simple, right? So now let's say you enter any username. So this username, this field I will remove only. Okay, and let's say the room ID is 1. So if I submit, it will take you to the login page first. Only after that you will go to the main page. Yeah, so we have implemented the login functionality, and if you still have any doubts, you can put them in the comment section below. That's it from this video. Thanks for watching.